I'm Colin Harrison with IBM. I'm one of the people who is sometimes accused of organizing this event, and I am going to immediately turn this over to Jennifer Wolch, the Dean of the College of Environmental Design, who is our host here in Berkeley. So, Jennifer, please join us.
Thank you, Colin, and welcome to everybody here at Berkeley. I thought I would start today with having everybody think back to 9/11, and of course it's September 11th today, and so we thought we might start with a moment of silence in recognition of the lives lost as a result of 9/11. So, welcome again, everyone, to UC Berkeley. As Colin said, I'm Jennifer Wolch, Dean of the College of Environmental Design, and I hope that later, as part of the program, you will be visiting our college in Worcester Hall, which is almost right across the street from the I House. I want to also thank the organizers of the conference, who have done just a terrific job putting the program together and getting everyone here. First and foremost, Yuri Parasak from IBM and Colin Harrison, also from IBM, Mark Baker from Esri. Constantine Condacosta is from NYU. Unfortunately, he had a family emergency and can't be here, but did participate in the organizing of the conference. Keith Besserud from SOM, and also Nicholas DeMoncho, who is from the Department of Architecture here at Berkeley. And I also want to thank Susan Cass, who was the local organizing staff person here, who made everything happen with the I House. I think I'm very pleased to see this conference happen today and happen here at Berkeley. Because I think it's becoming increasingly clear to those of us who think about cities and the future facing cities that we really need to harness technology in all its manifest forms to manage cities more effectively and also make them more resilient in the face of extreme events and climate change. And I think that the events that have occurred around the world really in the last few years have driven this fact home. And because of the leadership of some of the key technology companies, we are seeing real innovation in making cities smarter, making data available from new sources to help manage the city and or cities and city systems, and in general making cities more resilient. But we have a long, long way to go, and so conferences like this are an important place for people to exchange ideas, to imagine new ways of doing things in cities, and to think about how different kinds of technology might come together to play an important role in urban management. One of the other things that I really appreciate about this conference and its thematics is that it also emphasizes urban communities and recognizes that reliance on technology shouldn't mean that urban communities aren't involved in the design and implementation of systems that help make cities more adaptive. And indeed, urban adaptation is at its heart a social issue because it will require significant changes in governance, in infrastructure planning, and urban design, and many other human-centered design activities to actually alter the way we run cities, the way we manage cities, and the way we govern them in the face of the kinds of change that we're going to be facing over the next decades. Today, with more and more tools, technology tools that link urban residents to city planning analysis, to planning and policy, and urban visioning, we're really within reach of creating approaches that connect the grassroots with public agencies and with companies that are leading the development of the most advanced technologies. And I'm very pleased to say that here at UC Berkeley, we have a number of groups on campus, cross-disciplinary groups, working on just these issues. In the College of Environmental Design, Paul Waddell from City and Regional Planning has just created a new Center for Urban Simulation and Planning, which harnesses very advanced geospatial analysis and geovisualization technologies to imagine the city in great detail and to compare different kinds of sustainability alternatives. That's one example. You're probably going to hear, I'm sure you're going to hear about what Nicholas is doing as well in this same kind of area. The College of Engineering also has groups working on issues of smart cities, the iSchool, the Information School as well, and Citrus, the UC system-wide organization that is dedicated to science and technology and society, also has groups that are working on urban adaptation and change. So this is a very lively topic here on campus, and I couldn't be more pleased to welcome you all and to be able to listen to the discussion today. Thank you very much.
So let me take a few minutes to just set the program for the next couple of days. It's a great pleasure for me personally to be back here in Berkeley. I was astonished when I reflected on this. It is probably about 30 years since I've been on the Berkeley campus. At that time for IBM, I was leading a program working jointly with Berkeley and also MIT and Harvard Med School, building experimental magnetic resonance imaging systems. And here we were working with a group led by Tom Budinger, who was a doctor, physician who taught actually signal processing over in Corey Hall. We built a small building up on the hill at what was then called LBL. I gather it's now called LBNL. And I have a feeling that I'd love to get confirmed, if anybody knows, that building is now where the Intelligent Buildings Group works. But I'd love to hear more about that. Oh dear, sorry, I'm not going to do that. So I'd like to also, before we begin on the program, to thank our sponsors. We're a small organization, a very simple organization, but we get a lot of help. We get help from the American Planning Association, from Cisco, from Esri, IBM, New York University. The Open Plan Group in New York has been enormously helpful to us. The Regional Plan Association in New York, too. Skidmore, Owings, and Mayoral in Chicago has been a terrific help, not least through Keith Besserhurt. And we also thank International House for allowing us to use this beautiful venue for this meeting. We'll be in this auditorium today. Tomorrow we'll be in the auditorium and also in a couple of breakout rooms. And I particularly want to thank Susan Cass, who really helped to keep everything coordinated here at this end. And also Nick DeMonchaux, who has been just terrific in opening doors for us and making this a very rich program as we get going here. We began a couple of years ago coming from a group of engineers and researchers looking at technology for smart cities, who realized that that was only one side of the story. That what we needed understanding on was how that technology was going to influence the evolution of cities. As Jennifer said, how cities are going to operate in the future. And that really is very much the theme for the Urban Systems Collaborative in general, and this meeting in particular. We began it with a symposium of this kind in May last year at NYU. We had a small meeting in Chicago with the Metropolitan Planning Council there in April of this year, looking at the role of information in design and planning. And for this meeting, the focus is really going to be on the roles of information flows in the operation, the management of cities, how cities are actually working. That's a very big space, and even in a couple of days, there isn't time to look at all aspects of it. So we're picking out specific areas. Some of them you can see here on the program behind me, and others we're going to explore together in the workshops tomorrow. Information technology, I always feel, should come at least with a warning sticker, which is that it is a very dangerous technology. It's like inviting an interior designer into your house to maybe change the color of the walls and fix up the furniture a little bit. But by the time that person's been in the house for a couple of hours, you find that you're redesigning the entire structure of the house. This is what information technology has done in the last 40 or 50 years across many, many industries and many areas of government. It is coming only recently into that kind of role in cities, and that is, I think, certainly speaking for the team from IBM, I think was the thing that really excited us when we kind of stumbled into this area a few years ago, that it is, in fact, a transformational technology. So beware of that in your thinking over the next 36 hours or so. So this is very much not about the technology, it's about what the technology enables. It's not an industry conference. We're not here to compare IBM's technology with Cisco or Esri or Code for America. We're here to try and understand how those technologies in general enable the evolution of cities in the future here. First up on our program is the most distinguished guest, Steve Koonin, has joined us coming in from New York. Steve is originally a theoretical physicist, at one time Under Secretary of Energy for Science, chief scientist for BP, and also the head of the California Institute of Technology. So a most distinguished guest, and he will be speaking in just a few minutes here. We go on from that to the program, which was just on the projector behind me, I guess. Yuri, if I hit a button here, does it come back maybe? Yeah, that's great. Series of lightning talks, about 10 minutes each. We've had a couple of changes to the program just in the last 24 hours. Konstantin Contra-Costa has a family emergency and has not been able to join us, and his place will be taken by a good colleague, Jayant Kalagnanam, who will speak about resource management in cities. I should say also city operations is in fact John McCabe. Somehow we didn't manage to get John's name in there, and I apologize for that. Yuri Paraschek is actually going to be speaking for my colleague Peter Williams about water. Peter will be with us later this afternoon. And we're also expecting Nate Manning from Ushahidi to be with us. But Nate has been honored by being invited to become a U.S. Presidential Innovation Fellow and is in the process of moving to Washington. So this is a hazard when you manage to get really important people on your program, that they get dragged off to do other important things too. So that'll be most of the program for this morning. This afternoon, 3 panels that will allow us a lot more interaction around a similar set of topics, picking up on 3 particular areas of the operation of cities. Those will take us through the afternoon. I hope those will be very interactive. It probably would help, at least in the afternoon, for those of you sat way in the back 40 back there, if you come up and sit a little bit closer. And then in the evening, we'll go over to Worcester Hall, which is less than a 5-minute walk to the College of Environmental Design for a reception, and Nick DeMonchaux has arranged a series of student projects for us there. Tomorrow we begin with the real work. We are here for a purpose. I'm not going to tell you immediately what that purpose is, but this meeting is designed to help us move the Urban Systems Collaborative into a new venture. And I'm hoping that at the end of the day tomorrow, many of you will feel motivated and enthusiastic to take part in that. But I'm not going to tell you what it is right now. So these are 3 workshops that will be facilitated by the people who had led the panels today. And the purpose of those workshops is to look at a few use cases. You probably only have time for a couple of use cases on in those three areas, how will improved access to information, improved flow of information, change the way that we think about those aspects of city management, city operations? Then we'll come back together at midday and in the afternoon and sort of try and wrap this story together, and then I will tell you the surprise activity that we have in mind here. So with that, the streaming is going. My image is being broadcast to the universe, and at that point I invite Steve Koonin then to join us and give us his wisdom. Thank you very much.
Wisdom, I don't know, but at least information. We'll see if we can do that. Unlike, I would guess, almost all of you, I'm relatively new to this business of cities and data. Nevertheless, I find myself, not by accident, charged with creating and operating a rather significant effort in that intersection. So most of my talk will be prospective, but I thought what would be most interesting for you is for me to first talk a little bit about how I came to realize that this was an extraordinarily important and interesting subject. I'll talk then a little bit about the organization I'm leading, CUSP, the Center for Urban Science and Progress, and then I'll offer some observations and challenges that we're encountering even in these very early days of the exercise. So let me first start talking about why cities and data. For me, the case is remarkably simple, and that is that as we think over the next 40 years about sustainability, competitiveness, and so on, the societal dimensions, i.e. the non-technical dimensions, are crucial. The next several decades are going to be dominated by demographics, completion of the quadrupling of the population in the last century, most of that growth in Asia and Africa, and development, the rise of 2/3 of humanity with all of the resource consumption that will very likely entail. And these will be the big stressors for the globe. As a scientist, it is disappointing to have realized over the last several years that technical innovation alone is not going to solve the problem. You will hear often, usually from Washington, but also from many universities, the phrases moonshot, Manhattan Project, in the energy domain, inventing the clean energy future, it rolls trippingly off the tongue, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are good things to be doing, but by far it's much more important to realize that there are structural features that retard or mitigate the impact of new technologies, and that the societal levers, the politics, the economics, the culture, behavior, perceptions, that these are as important, maybe even more important, than inventing the next new widget. And we in the US have had, I would say, politely mixed success in combining technical and societal dimensions as we try to respond to these challenges. And so starting about more than a year ago, I was drawn to the issue of social science and what can one do there to help these processes along. And of course, one realizes immediately people have been thinking seriously about this for centuries. And so you ask, what's new? Are there game changers in the social sciences? And for me, it was the realization that big data is about to, in fact, already is starting to revolutionize our understanding of the societal issues. Our abilities to sense, transmit, store, analyze enormous amounts of data are growing very rapidly. So the question one asks, I asked, again, probably a year and a half ago, is how do you instrument society? What do you want to know? How can you find out about it? And what could you do with that information, both in a descriptive sense, but then also in a prescriptive or interventionist sense? And a lot of my thinking was stimulated by a report I helped sponsor when I was in the government, having to do with greenhouse gas treaty verification. The problem being if the US and other countries like China, India, the EU signed up to a treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then 10 years into the treaty, China came back and said, we did it. How would you know? And a very serious group of folks at the national laboratories sat down and thought about this for a while. The answer turns out to be a mix of self-reporting, in situ monitoring of CO2, remote sensing of CO2 from either drones or satellites, and then many proxies that you can observe. How many coal cars are there in trains? How many automobiles, and so on. And this got me interested in the whole notion of how do you really understand what's going on in society at a rather detailed level from various sensing technologies. The other big theme, of course, in data in cities is the cities, and it's simply stated that most people are in cities, and even more will be over the next several decades. You probably all know, but again, it's worth repeating, 50% of the population now around the globe in urban areas, 80% by mid-century. In North America, already 80%, going to 90% by mid-century. And so, in short, the cities are where the people are, it's where resources get consumed, it's where economic activity happens, it's where innovation happens. Those of you who know Jeff West's work on the scaling of cities will know that that happens, these last two, economic activity and innovation, happen in a superlinear way as cities get larger. I don't know if Jeff was the source of this quote, but I like it. Cities are both the cause of our problems and the source of the solutions. And so we want to fix the next 40 years. It's in the cities. As was already mentioned, cities have to be efficient. They have to be resilient, which is often conjugate to efficiency. They have to be sustainable and address these softer areas of quality of life, equity, citizen engagement. All cities need to do that for global issues. And individual cities are, of course, in competition for talent, for capital, and each city needs to be as good as it can be. So, therefore, of course, one is drawn to this intersection of data and cities. Or go down now a somewhat deeper technical level and ask, what does it mean to instrument a city, to understand what's going on? Again, I never took a course in urban planning, but seems to me pretty self-evident. Cities deliver services to the citizens through infrastructure and processes. The services starting from the most important: shelter, safety, security, health, food, water, et cetera, et cetera. The real question is, how do these systems operate and how do they interact and how can we optimize? We've already seen a little bit of success in predictive policing and some traffic management, but we would, I think, like to extend this to the city in a much more holistic way. And to do that, I think we need to instrument first the infrastructure. I want to know the condition of the infrastructure. How well is that particular apartment insulated? Where are the joints corroding in the bridge? Where are the potholes in the road? And I want to know about the operation of the infrastructure, the load on the electrical grid at any given time, the traffic flow, water, gas, et cetera. Second thing I want to know about is environment. I want to know about the meteorology. I want to know about pollution. I want to know about noise. How is it changing? How is it affecting these other variables? And the last, and I'm sorry that the bullet is missing there, people. I want to know location, economic activity, communication activity, health, and so on. And those of you who are in the business will already recognize immediately that that raises the privacy concern. And privacy is really important in these discussions, but for most of what I want to say, I want to put that aside, and as a physicist say we're going to operate in the zero privacy limit. We will come back in a while and discuss some of the very real considerations of privacy, but right now I want to put privacy off the table. If you can instrument a city, know everything that's going on, there are lots of people who will be interested in your ability to do that. The government, the local government, obviously. The federal government here in the US will be interested because already People like the Census Bureau are having trouble trying to produce reliable statistics, and so they're looking for proxies, things that you can use to get a handle on labor statistics, GDP, inflation rate, and so on, that may not be the usual survey-driven ways of doing things. Citizens obviously also interested, and I think one of the interesting questions, and my guess is it is on the agenda for this meeting, is how does government change when citizens have access to all of this data about what the government is doing, its performance in delivering services, and so on. It's not a question for the geeks, but it is one for the social scientists, I think, a very interesting one. The second class of people who will be interested if you can instrument the city is the private sector. The retail, most obviously. New York Times over the last year has had about one article a week in how big data is changing the retail sector, whether it's Target or Axiom or whoever else is doing that. The insurance companies are interested because they want to better stratify the risk that they're insuring and go down to the next or third level of detail to be able to hone the pricing in insurance. The financial sector, obviously. And then finally, the political campaigns in this season are doing big data and an understanding of the targeting in a way that's never been done before. The security organizations will also be interested. Local law enforcement, the police departments I've already mentioned, national law enforcement like Homeland Security, and the folks who worry about security in an international arena, they're all interested. Their job is mostly finding a needle in the haystack, whereas we, for city purposes, are interested in the shape of the haystack. Nevertheless, the data sources, some of the analysis methods, will be very similar. And then finally, the social scientists. As I've come to understand social science, the tradition is in surveys where you put together a questionnaire, go send it out to 1,000 people, and very carefully curate the data and draw whatever conclusions you can from it. A very intensive, expensive, time-consuming process. Or you look at aggregate data flows. We have the ability now to look at 1 million people at once in various ways. I'll show you some examples in a moment. And so you can, I think, take social science in a very different and very interesting direction, complementary to what's traditional in the field, and really change it, much in the same way that the Sloan Sky Survey changed astronomy, for those of you who know that business. Really get a sense of what the pulse of the city looks like. Here's just one small example. It's an NYU example that we've seen recently. Claudio Silva and Juliana Ferrer, who are professors at NYU Poly, got hold of the taxi data set for 2011 in New York City. So every one of the 180 million taxi rides from the roughly 15,000 taxis. They have GPS start, GPS stop, and fare. They don't have the breadcrumbs for the trajectories. Those exist, but because some private company has got them, they couldn't get hold of them at the moment. Anyway, you can already start to see interesting things. This is just for some subset where the drop-offs and pickups happen for the taxi fares. And what's interesting is most of the drop-offs occur on the avenues, most of the pickups occur on the streets. For those of you who've lived any time in New York City, you can make up a story about why that's true. All right. Another one on the taxi data. This is just the number of rides per day for every day of the year in 2011. You can see the weekly cycle, low on Sundays, climbing up through the week to Friday and then dropping down again, Saturday, Sunday. And then you can see events like Christmas on the right. You can see the hurricane that blew through in late August, Irene. You can see the marathon that happened on April 2nd and 3rd. And you can see vacations setting in August, right? So data like this in much more detail start to give us a sense of the pulse of the city, pattern of life, how it works, and then you can start to look for anomalies against it. Okay, so I'm, as was mentioned, a physical scientist by training, and I'm immediately asking, where are you going to get your data from? And I think there are the organic data flows that we can tap into already, administrative records like the census, building permits, health records that the city has, educational records. There are the transactional data, sales records, communications, who's talking to whom, communicating with whom, and then operational data that exist already, traffic, transit, utilities, health system. But then I think there are others, particularly in the realm of sensors. We can think about personal sensors, I'll show you some examples in a moment, that look at individual location, activity, physiology. We can do fixed in situ sensors, putting in a microphone or a temperature sensor in a room or a building. We can do crowdsourcing in interesting ways using mobile phones as sensing platforms. We can put sensors in at choke points, tolls, highway entrances, portals that people pass through. And then we can do remote sensing. And the challenge, I think, is to learn how to put all of this together to get what you want to do. And then there are novel technologies you can, if you're a physical scientist, you're interested in exploring whether they're of any use. Infrared, spectral imagery, LiDAR, radio spectrum, magnetic spectrum, seismic acoustic, one can go on and on, all the things we know how to measure about the physical world. A couple pictures to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. That's something that Jawbone sells. It's a little personal activity monitor. It measures your activity, your pulse, respiration, maybe skin resistance, I don't know. Sends it out to your iPhone and you get a health report once a week. And getting that in aggregate for a population of 100,000 people, that would be pretty interesting, I think. Surveillance cameras everywhere. There are data feeds that can be exploited to understand more about the city. Satellite imagery, statistics. This is the Census Bureau in Washington. And then one of the things I think is underexploited is big buildings. This shows various big buildings around the world. Empire State Building, about 400 meters tall. The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, 800 meters. There's a 1 kilometer building, I guess, getting built in Shanghai, right? So these offer interesting perspectives on the city. This is the view south from the Empire State Building. It's not a very good image. This is a 1 megapixel image. You can buy a camera today for 36 megapixels for a couple $1,000. It's probably also not a very good lens. It's a wide-angle picture. But it's pretty interesting. First of all, you can see lots of lights. Probably 100,000 of them in this picture. Well, maybe 50,000. You can also see a long way. For those of you who know the geometry of the city, that's the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in the left center background. And you can see out to Brooklyn and over into Staten Island and so on. And I look at this and I'm thinking astronomy. All right? It's different meaning for urban astronomy than usual. Every one of those lights I know the location of, except for the traffic, which isn't much. And it would be real interesting to understand when they go on and off. What are they fluorescent, incandescent, LED, et cetera, et cetera. Probably if I watch the intensity carefully, I can see somebody's dishwasher turn on from the electrical transient. All right? So I think there are interesting opportunities here to understand, again, in a synoptic way, what's going on in a city. Here's another one, different spectral image. This is the infrared now, picture of Lower Manhattan. I look at this, I see a couple of interesting things. That building on the left, I can see the individual offices or apartments. I have no idea what that building is. But some of them are hot and some of them are not, whether that's due to the thermostat setting or the insulation and so on. I don't know, but we can correlate it with other data. Similarly, that building in the middle, which is hot at the bottom and hot at the top and cool for most of its height, that's interesting. Again, what's going on there and why are people operating the building that way? And then the last thing, again, is you're probably looking at 50,000 people with this one sensor. It's not perfect. There's shadowing. You have to learn how to interpret these things. But nevertheless, it's a different way of collecting data than simply looking at everybody's gas bill once a month. So then you ask, what can you do with the data? I'm not going to go through this in detail. You're probably much more expert than I in all of this, but my list includes operational optimization, emergency management, epidemiology, infrastructure planning, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's the context. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing these days. Let me tell you what it is I'm doing and talk about this center CUSP for Urban Science and Progress that we're establishing in New York. It is part of the mayor's Applied Science initiative. About 2 years ago, the mayor put out a call for proposals to bring more applied science into New York City. The first winner of that was declared, I think, around right after Thanksgiving. And that was a collaboration between Cornell and the Technion in Israel to build a good chunk of a research university on Roosevelt Island. And they are engaged in that process. They've made some initial hires, starting to realize the physical campus and so on. As part of that competition, NYU put in a proposal to create this entity called CUSP, and the mayor in that picture declared that proposal the second winner in April. And you can see various New York City and NYU luminaries there next to the mayor. I had the good sense to stay off out of the picture and let the politicians take center stage. So what is it? It is a partnership, I think, almost unique between academia, the private sector, and the government. The academic partners are led by NYU and NYU Poly, but include Carnegie Mellon, Toronto, Warwick, City University, and IIT Mumbai. The industrial partners, the major participants are IBM and Cisco, smaller participation from Siemens, Xerox, Con Ed, which is the electrical utility provider in New York City, and National Grid, which provides most of the gas in New York City, and then Arap Ideo and AECOM as lesser industrial partners. And then I think perhaps uniquely, we are in close partnership with the city and state agencies. There are 13 New York City agencies that are working with us, all of the obvious ones perhaps. MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority that runs the subways and buses in New York, and the Port Authority that runs the bridges and tunnels and the port. And since we have begun defining and creating this thing, we've seen many other organizations come forward and say, hey, we would like to be a part of this. The vision is to use New York City as a lab and a classroom. If you just look through that mission statement, the keywords are public-private research center, city is a lab and classroom to do all the good things that you can imagine doing. CUSP is about the data. It observes, analyzes, models cities, and educates people. Some of the defining characteristics are we are part of the city. One of the reasons I went to New York to do this, of course, was to be in the middle of what it is we're trying to improve. That's where our headquarters is in downtown Brooklyn. A close-up of it shows we'll be in the 19th floor of a high-rise starting in January, with about 25,000 square feet. And then in 5 years, we'll be in that iconic subway building, the green bubble over there, with about 150,000 square feet. As I mentioned, it's a three-way partnership. We're aimed at integrating physical and tabular data together. I like to say I want to build an organization that goes from sensors to sociologists, which is mission-focused to do the things we're talking about. For the students, real-world educational and project experience, and engaging the citizens of the city as well through a living lab and open science, and of course generating commercial activity, whether for our big corporate partners or entrepreneurial spin-offs. The scale envisioned in 5 years is that we'll have 50 full-time senior folks. I have 30 faculty lines to try to fill, 20 industrial researchers on site, 30 postdocs, several hundred master's students, 100 PhD candidates, as I mentioned, in Brooklyn, budget of order $70 million a year. The educational programs, we are part of a university, and so we're educating students. Starting next fall, about a year from now, we hope to have a class enrolled in a master's program in urban science and informatics. That has a curriculum that's being approved right now by NYU and the state of New York that mixes the informatics disciplines together with urban domains, as well as the softer subjects of governance, finance, organizational dynamics, entrepreneurship, and so on. A very strong project component to it. In following years, we hope to develop the kind of programs that are now de rigueur for modern higher ed, not only a PhD, but executive master's programs, joint degrees, distance learning, and so on. Constantine Contacosta, who was already mentioned, is the deputy director and is in charge of standing up these educational programs. We hope to be training people either in the city agencies now or will be employed by the city agencies who know urban systems and know informatics. And they'll find employment in agencies in many cities around the world, as well as the corporations who support those agencies, startups, and NGOs. Let me talk a little bit about the way we think about the research program then. What are we actually going to do? And I need to balance the needs of the academics who are interested in pushing the forefronts of their disciplines and training students against the needs of the corporations who are involved perhaps only partly for philanthropic reasons, and then the government who wants to see real, pretty immediate impact. And so we start with a set of faculty who are working in the core informatics disciplines: data acquisition, data integration, data analysis, and all of the various subdisciplines having to do with data management, curation, analytics, visualization, GIS. We need the world's best GIS capability, machine learning, sensing, et cetera, et cetera. I then need a set of faculty who know the urban domains. Exactly which ones and at what level of granularity, I don't know yet, but I clearly need people who know about transit, utilities, buildings, health, and so on. And then I'm going to create a set of strongly managed projects that matrix between these two dimensions. These projects, many of them will be agreed upon with the city. Others might be just because the partners think they'd be an interesting thing to do. Some very small ones might be initiated by students themselves. An important part of what we're thinking about also are the social scientists. These are the people who know what questions to ask about the city. Most of the computer scientists, the engineers, haven't the faintest clue. And already as we've started that dialogue, some really interesting questions have come up that we think we can start to answer with modern data collection and analysis techniques. And then finally, there is the living lab that we hope to create. In the same way that neuroscientists want to take 1 square centimeter of cortex and instrument every neuron in order to understand how their brain works, suppose we took a couple 100,000 people in a city and, of course, with their permission, put in as much instrumentation as we could in a kind of campaign mode. That's a very interesting idea. We'll see how far we get with that. Okay, let me close with some observations and learnings to date for those of you who may be involved in starting up or operating similar activities. Here's some of the things I'm learning, we're learning. One is that there are a lot of balances to respect here and try to execute. There are many different stakeholders here: the academics, industry, government, citizens. They've got diverse perspectives and diverse goals, and trying to balance all of that is an interesting, but I don't think impossible task. Another balance, or really dialogue, is between the social and physical sciences. We've started in on that. Again, very interesting. Just trying to get a common language, a common understanding of what the problems are, what the technologies can do, et cetera, et cetera. Within the program, balancing the domains versus the disciplines, balancing the basic research and development against demonstrations, balancing short-term versus long-term. Anyone who has run a complex research organization faces this kind of thing, but we're doing it here with a newly created organization. There's the issue of definition of scope. We're in New York City. We're sponsored in part by the city of New York. On the other hand, New York City is not an island unto itself. It exists in a region. For example, the watershed in New York extends several hundred miles upstate. To what extent should that be part of what we're about? New York City is only one city in the US. There are many others. How much should we be focusing on that? And what about international? My own inclination, although there are other people who can talk convincingly otherwise, is to start at the beginning by focusing on New York, because some of the novel aspects of what we're doing are being able to combine, to mass a lot of effort in one place in a very, I hate to use the word synergistic, many different modalities to get a complete picture of the city, and then go out a little bit later to other cities. There's also the problem of retrofit of existing cities, which is what we are largely about, versus new build cities, which is an entirely different problem. But I think many of the things we'll learn from New York will have lessons for those new build cities. And then there's the issue of data, which is what I would like to focus CUSP on, versus the adjacent areas in materials, engineering, versus the even softer subjects of city governance and so on. And how do we connect up with those without diluting the focus of what we're trying to do to get it off the ground? Okay, second learning, big data. Big data is really different. Already we can start to see some advantages. The first is that big data does bring some new capabilities. For example, the better identification of outliers. Were Konstantin Kantacosta here, he probably would have talked a little bit about his work analyzing the building efficiency survey data that New York City has just made available. I'll put up this picture just to illustrate the outlier point. The upper histogram in orange is the energy use intensity, BTUs per square foot per year of, I don't know how many, several thousand residential buildings in New York City. And what you can see is that it's a pretty Gaussian normal distribution, a little bit of a tail on the high side. The the office buildings are shown in the lower histogram look very different. There are outliers, perhaps a second bump in the distribution. I don't know what that is, but with lots of statistics, you can more confidently identify those outliers, which I think experience shows are always interesting in one way or another. Why is that building using so much energy? I don't know. And what about the guys on the low side? Why are they so low? Other things you can do with lots of data. You can more finely stratify the data. You can build proxies for the data, things that you can readily observe that might stand in for things that would be more difficult to observe, calibrate your models better, and really exploit the power of correlation. One of the, you know what, I'm not going to go into that because I want to take some questions. Big data brings new challenges. Data quality is an issue. With these big data sets, you discover that they're not really very good. You've got to clean them up a lot. And the data are in diverse hands. Different organizations hold the economic data versus the utility data versus the transportation data. And collecting all of that is a major organizational challenge. Finally, big data in a city brings several concerns with it, and CUSP will have a chief data officer responsible for managing these concerns. One dimension is proprietary. A company might be involved with us with proprietary algorithms, or someone might contribute a data set that they'd like to be closely held. Another dimension of data access is critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. If you really have data sets and models that demonstrate how the subway system works, for example, in great detail, there are opportunities for mischief there that you may not want to make available to the whole world. And then finally, privacy. So there are three different dimensions, really, to deal with. Let me say a couple of words about privacy, since it is probably the most problematic of these. First is that privacy is structural. You can't study society, you can't do smart cities without studying the people at some level. People are part of the city. That's why the city exists. Second is that people will voluntarily give up their data if they can see a personal or societal benefit. Social networks exploit this. There are other websites that collect data on driving use. VoltStats did it for Chevy Volts. You know, when the financial companies call you up and ask you about funny charges on your credit card, you are giving up some of your personal data in exchange for the added security that they can provide. Similarly, if I'm in New York and I can show you the parking spots if you give me your location, you might be willing to do that, the open parking spots. I think another observation is that norms and expectations with respect to privacy are changing with generations, and that can be harnessed. There are technical fixes for multi-level privacy and classification, ways of degrading the data so that you can protect privacy while still making it useful. And this is happening to us anyway. And we should do our best to ensure, through organizations like this that are open, that it be done sensibly. One realization I've had in the last 3 or 4 months, pretty simple, but I think illustrates the point. It doesn't take very much data to identify an individual. If I know your zip code, I know you to 1 in 30,000 people, which is the average population of a zip code. If I, in addition, know your birthday, I now have localized you to 1 in 100. If, in addition, I know your gender, we're down to 1 in 50, and if I know your year of birth, I pretty well localized you as an individual. So the real privacy issues have to do with correlation of data and the ability of successive correlations to exponentially invade privacy, if you like. So that's the kind of thing we need to understand how to manage. And I think also for city purposes, we don't know what the optimal level of privacy is yet for what we're interested in. As I go on the bottom axis from measuring what's going on in a home, to a building, to a block, to a neighborhood, clearly the anonymity goes up and the data volume and opportunity for stratification go down, and somewhere there's a sweet spot depending upon what it is you're trying to do. And different users will have different needs in that regard. All right, I think this is the last one. What are some of the possible projects? We've been out and about for the last 4 months talking with the city agencies down to the senior career people in each of the agencies, and are starting to get a sense of what we might be able to contribute. One is simply getting the city's data sorted out in both cleaning up and making interoperable diverse city data sets. If you go to Open Data NYC, there's a website with about 1,000 data sets of, again, politely stated, varying quality and utility. And can we start with those data sets and just make them interoperable with standard data mining tools? It's a good start, an important piece of CUSP infrastructure. Second, 3D urban GIS capability, down to about a 1-foot resolution in 3 dimensions, would be very useful. Something, again, we'll either acquire or build and enhance ourselves. One pretty quick win is correlating multiple data sets to improve the allocation of city resources. You can improve the efficiency of what the city does enormously, and there have been a couple of examples already within the city government, taking open public data sets, putting them together, and making city enforcement, for example, much more efficient. Of course, this is what the police are doing with predictive policing, but there are other areas of city operations where this seems particularly effective. Getting on to more physical things, noise. Most of the 311 complaints in New York City, the non-emergency emergency number, are noise related. And I can tell you as an adult coming back to the city to live, my biggest complaint is the noise. And so can we measure it? Can we characterize it? Can we do something about responding to it? Seems to be an interesting problem. Temperature, another environmental issue with the heat waves. How do we better predict and manage the response to extreme temperatures? Pollution, another example. More than half of the particulate pollution in New York City is due to stationary sources, people burning heating oil. That's about 10,000 buildings. You know where each one of them is. I think we can change the tenor of the discussion simply by monitoring and making public those plumes. You might get a text message, for example, saying, at your location in this hour, most of the pollution is due to 375 Broadway. And that might change the political discussion. Mobility, obviously we need to do something here. Exactly what remains to be seen. We've got also some ideas about novel sensing of public health that we're working on. Building efficiency, we can do a lot more. And the definition of this living lab thing. What sensors do you want to put out? What do you measure? What do you do with it? Et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I think we've got a few minutes to take comments and questions. I'm happy to hear responses. Thanks.
Hi, and thank you. My name is Greg. I'm with Forefront Creative Solutions Laboratory. And with the smart grid and the new infrastructure that's going to be coming in, smart metering, I was wondering how much you all are looking at that, and if you could make any general comments about how you see that playing into what you're going to be doing.
So, look, the smart metering, let's suppose done with enough cadence to be pretty interesting at the, say, 5-minute level or so. It's a wonderful source of in situ sensing. Con Ed is a partner. We've not yet gotten into discussions about how we could get access to that data, under what restrictions and so on. I mean, for two reasons. One is it is commercially sensitive, and two, it is a privacy issue. But nevertheless, being able to correlate electricity and gas and water use across the city in these big data sets, that's pretty interesting. The lights that I talked about, perhaps a proxy for getting at that without having to go in and get the data from the meters. Can I calibrate the lights against some meter data? That would be interesting, because I can measure a lot more lights than I can get meters. And in cities where I can't get the meters. So, yes, obviously. Gas, water, electric, sure.
Steve, Yuri Paraschek, IBM Research. How do you see the professions that currently administer, run, plan, operate cities changing as a consequence of what you guys are going to do?
The people who practice those professions now in the city, like all government personnel, are up to some fraction of their anatomy in tactical problems, and so have difficulty either introducing new technologies or thinking longer term. Not because they don't want to, but having been in government myself, I know the immediate squeezes out the longer term. I think what we can do is, first of all, try to understand ourselves what the potential is for these technologies, educate people either through the executive education or the next generation. That's probably how it's going to change. And, discrete, I won't say incremental, but not big bang kinds of projects in existing cities. Look, it seems to me we're exploring all this stuff. There's a lot of potential here, and we need to understand what it is before we go out and start beating on cities. You got to do this, you got to do that, and so on.
David Reinke, Kittleson Associates. One thing I've noticed in professions, in transportation in particular, there's a kind of a culture that seems to resist change. I've seen in transportation it typically takes 10 to 30 years for an outside innovation to work its way in. I've seen it especially in the data area, which I'm interested in. And again, I'm hoping your experiment can overcome that.
I wouldn't blame the troglodyte professionals. This is, I think, a universal constant of human society. Two examples from the sciences. I already mentioned big data in astronomy. The sky surveys came in and gave us hundreds of supernovae to look at over a few years instead of the handful. It changed the science. Not everybody believed it. It took a long time for that to kind of sink into the community. Fortunately, the sciences are much crisper in some ways, and it goes a bit faster. The same is true of, say, big genomics in biology. You had a lot of the establishment saying, what the hell is this? What are you going to learn from sequencing the genome? It's not discovery-driven science. And of course, it's enabled so much. And I think we're seeing that now in the social sciences. You're seeing a lot of folks who are, I'll say the old guard, saying you'll never learn anything from that big data, but you got a few people in the field and other people coming in from outside the field. I was sitting around the table with about 10 researchers from some big data company, never mind exactly who, and those folks were remarkably astute, interesting. Most of them were physicists, and they were working at this intersection of big data and social science. And so I think you're going to see people coming into the field just because new data brings new science, and we've got the ability to generate it now. The professions will come along, maybe a bit more slowly, but eventually we'll get there. Yeah.
Dan Chapman, Department of City and Regional Planning here. A comment and a question. The notion of big data can be thought of in two ways, as you've articulated it. One of them is big data sets that have lots of observations. Another one that you alluded to was this, I guess, this living lab idea where you have multiple sources of data being collected on units of observation, whatever those might be, buildings or people. And what strikes me about big data and what I think about in my own work when I do transportation and land use planning, and I work with surveys and things like that, is that the what questions are the sorts of things that what can answer with lots of different data sources, including data sources that are primarily sensor-based, administrative, and so on. But the why questions are a bit harder to answer. Because one doesn't know why one is observing the patterns that one is observing with great detail and with better accuracy with big data. So I'm wondering if you've thought about this problem and opportunity in terms of the other sense of big data, the correlation of multiple sources of data, to bring in survey, qualitative, interview kinds of information to help answer those why questions.
It's not one or the other. You probably need both. The thing I just picked out from what you said, I'd like to respond to a bit. And frankly, I'm of mixed mind. At one level, not everything you can know is interesting, and so you should collect all this data. On the other hand, if it's pretty easy to do, as it seems to be, technically, economically, and so on, you never know what you're going to find when you go exploring, and there's always that serendipity that somebody discovers a really interesting correlation between one variable and another. So part of me wants to just make all that data available and let's go explore, as well as the more directed activities of let's make the traffic run better around this particular section and so on. I think in the end, this kind of synoptic data is going to be so easy to collect, or not much more difficult to collect, that we're going to collect it. And then the question is, let's go play and understand. We can, you can ask all sorts of crazy questions. Do rich people wake up earlier, right? Or what's the correlation between noise and public health if you take out all the other variables, economics and so on? You could start to ask those questions. That's pretty interesting. Science more than it is application.
Hey, this is Pat Wallace. I'm an architect, planner, and technologist with Esri, and I just had a quick question. Are you worried that New York City is an outlier in terms of this research center and a lab? Well, I mean, in my research, I see that, there's been a precipitous density drop over the last 60 years. On average, we were 7,500 people per square mile in our central cities in 1950, whereas now we're 2,800 persons per square mile. And if you look at New York City in the latest census data, and just the core city area, I think it's 27,000 people per square mile. And if you want to tie that back to Jeff West's work, you'd want to have a control in the suburb area so that you could, try and at least say that, well, our findings are showing that these observations are indeed correct, that there is an economy of scale that can be leveraged in terms of saving, the U.S. enormous energy costs. If you look at the land area eaten up by this density drop, it's, I think it's 700,000 square miles over the last 60 years. So That's huge. I mean, that's a fifth of our entire land area.
So, several comments. One is that New York City maybe is an outlier, maybe not, but if we can help New York City be better, you've helped 16 million people in the metropolitan area, right? So that's worth it in and of itself. The second is that New York City, within the city, is incredibly diverse, and you can find those very high population densities in Manhattan, but I can go out to parts of Staten Island, Richmond, excuse me, and find very low population densities. So you can start to, I think, play some interesting case control studies there. And then finally, you know, if you can make it there, et cetera, the feeling is New York is diverse enough and complex enough that we'll be able to take some of those learnings and move them out, at least to other developed cities, perhaps not to the developing cities. So you can't do everything. Start by doing one thing that people care about.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It's great. Appreciate you're here. Last commenter, it was interesting. I had some of the same concerns about applicability to California, where we're here, and brings up. And I hope the professionals that are employed in the state are able to use your information wisely for their more spread out communities. I have another question though. And by the way, I did work in a government too. I'm here as UC Berkeley, but I worked as an inspector. Can you speak to the idea, you didn't talk much about how data ages. Is it useful after a certain amount of time? And I'm sure that's a pretty broad question, but maybe you could make a few comments about that. Ken Kratz is my name.
Yeah, just on the New York, California thing. I mean, I lived in California for 30 years, Southern California. We might ask whether the things in Pasadena are still applicable to what goes on here in Berkeley. It's probably not. Berkeley is also an outlier in many ways. Right. Every city is unique. Look, in the end, it's a question of what are the natural timescales of the processes you're interested in. Building construction and so on is pretty slow, roads even slower, so that data can be refreshed once every 5 years or something. Obviously, location data, economic activity, much more volatile and need to be updated more than that. So that's one thought. A second is cities are perhaps largely ergodic. Namely, if I look at this year, it's probably pretty much the same as last year or the year before, and so probably in broad terms, it doesn't matter so much refreshing the data. My guess is a taxi data set in 2008 would look pretty much like the 2010 data, apart from those identifiable events. So, as usual, it depends. Right, yep.
Just over the last 30 years, not the last 60, when you just look at BTUs used in the U.S., I think the amount we could say, right, if we had focused development in our central cities, it's about 100 was really in BTUs, which is a huge amount of
yeah.
I think that's enough to cover the whole U.S. for like 2 to 3 years.
Right.
I think there's a huge gains to be made by following this.
Yeah, the comparison of cities in those metrics is an interesting problem, well worth doing, I agree. Different than the question of making an individual city operate better. So, I mean, I just think it points out the fact there's lots to do here. This is a pretty interesting subject. Okay, thank you.
It is indeed, and Steve, thank you very much. I think you framed our session here beautifully.